This video lesson covers drafting the research paper. It's available in PDF form in the lesson also, but I would recommend going through the video at least once. Just an overview of what this presentation will cover. It covers some basic drafting tips for the final research paper. It reviews the information in Chapter 7 on avoiding plagiarism and the information in Chapter 7 on using quotes. And it covers just the basics of citing and using sources. Remember to cite for in-text and the MLA work cited. In this paper, you're going to have to just follow the links that I've provided, or the Bedford Handbook if you had it. I have the online links to the Bedford Handbook here, just to figure out how you're citing for your paper. Don't forget, you're writing an argument. An argument relies on reason. We've read some arguments that use emotions, pathos, and that's not what argument does. An academic argument uses logic and logos. You're going to be using sources to prove your points. They've got to be from the provided list of sources, and this is how you're going to provide logic, reasoning, and how you're also going to set yourself up as a credible writer. You're going to use critical thinking and follow all the instructions for submitting the draft final paper. Those are just some final reminders as we move into drafting and then submitting the final paper. I would like you all, I've mentioned several times, to keep this checklist for critical thinking, your attitudes, keep your thinking imaginative and open-minded. Be willing to examine your own assumptions. That's why I asked you all not to choose the topic that you feel so strongly about or have formed such a strong opinion on that you wouldn't be willing to examine your assumptions. Remain willing to entertain new ideas. Both those that come across in some of the sources that you are using in your paper and those that come to your own mind while writing. Make sure you're willing to exert yourself. This is not an easy project. It's not meant to be a simple project. Be willing to do research, to really examine your sources, to acquire information and evaluate it. And then these are the skills that you need. Evaluate assumptions and evidence. Summarize other people's arguments accurately to use them in your own. And present your ideas in an effective way, meaning an organized, formal manner appropriate to your audience, the academic audience for this paper. Getting started with a draft, you have an outline that you've done, and I've given you feedback. Try to think of this paper as an extended argumentative essay that just has sources. So it's longer, 6 pages double-spaced than maybe other arguments you've written. You're going to organize the paper as an argumentative essay following that video that I've provided on logical structure of an argument. Have your outline with my feedback. Revise the outline if needed, and once you've got your outline set and it's ready to go, go back in and decide which sources you're going to use in which section of your paper. So you have some sources to help back up the different sections of your argument and the points you want to make to prove your argument. Decide where in the paper you're going to put your sources, and then add those pencil them into your outline, or type them into your outline so you have them ready to go. Now we're going to talk about drafting the paper. These are some different things you can do in the introduction. Now, one thing to remember is that you should not get stuck writing the introduction. If you're starting to draft your paper and you're finding that you're stuck on the introduction, go ahead and write the body of the paper and come back and write the introduction. Here are some different things that you can do. You can do something to grab your audience's attention, a short story, an example, a statistic, set some historical context to introduce your paper topic. But don't start with a truism or sweeping generalization. By that, I mean don't say something like, all throughout history people have debated, or in society today everyone is doing something. These are just truths and generalizations, and they do not work as attention grabbers. You can start with an overview of any issues involved with the subject, definitions of any key terms. Some of you are writing about more complicated topics. You might need to start with some defining of key terms, maybe defining what a Western diet is, defining what a vegan diet is, defining what fracking is. Quotations or paraphrases that reveal the controversial nature of the subject. Argumentative papers, this works. Any background information people might need. You could briefly mention any opposing views. And some people also like to just briefly outline where they're going to go with the paper. These aren't all the things that you would do. You wouldn't do all of these things because an introduction isn't that long. But try to do some of these things in your introduction. Your introduction for this paper must end with a one-sentence thesis statement that tells what the overall paper will focus on and what the controlling main idea is of the paper, the position that you're going to take, what your argument is. The body of your research paper is the bulk of the paper. It's going to clearly present the main points of the paper. It's going to give strong examples, details, and explanations to support each main point, and it's going to address counterarguments and refute those arguments. There are a few different ways to organize this, and that's what this video that we've watched a few times now, I've pointed in a few lessons, is going to help you do. Some people build the counterarguments and refutations into their examples and explanations all along. Some people present their main argument, in their main argument they present all their points and examples and then follow with the counterarguments and refutations. This video again will discuss some different ways to do it. And in the body you're going to use strong evidence from your sources in the form of paraphrases, summaries, and quotations that support your main points. The conclusion, just like the introduction, it won't have all of these elements, but having some of the following elements will help you write a conclusion. You can restate the thesis from the introduction, but put it in different words. You can offer a brief summary of each main point found in the body of your paper, but to avoid going over 2 sentences. You don't want to give everything, 2 sentences for each point. Don't go completely repeat everything from your paper. You can tell people what the consequences will be if they don't adopt your position or don't embrace your position, predict what might happen. You can also end with a strong clincher statement, an appropriate, meaningful final sentence that ties the whole point of the paper together and may refer back to the attention grabber from the introduction. The works cited. The works cited page does not count in the page count. It has to be one of the pages in the document. It should be the last page in your paper, but it's going to be page 7 or page 8 or page 9, but it does not count in the page count. You have to have 6 sources from a permitted list in the research paper, instructions, and topics. You can't only list them in your works cited, but you have to use them at least once in your paper each. And 3 of those 6 sources must be scholarly and also have to be used once in the paper. So 6 sources total. 3 have to be scholarly, and to figure out if they're scholarly, I would have told you on the annotated bibliography, but you can also use from Lesson 5 the document called Is Your Journal Scholarly? Some additional tips. Decide on the thesis and main points first. I had you do that in the outline. Don't need to start by writing your paper with the introduction. Again, if you're stuck with the introduction, just get a draft of the thesis and then the body, and then see if you can go back and figure out how to best introduce your body and include your paper. Remember to use transitions between the main points and between examples within the main points. Always keep your thesis in the forefront of your mind while writing. Everything in this paper, every sentence and every word must point back to your thesis. The rest of this presentation covers some information from Chapter 7 about avoiding plagiarism and about quoting and paraphrasing. Just remember, you need to avoid plagiarism, you need to use quotes and paraphrase appropriately, and you will need to cite correctly in MLA. I cautioned you all on the use of citation generators in Lesson 1. What this means is there are some built-in features on Word. There are some websites that say they'll build their sources for you, but they make mistakes. Something that just asks you to just quickly. Just like you can't trust a spell check or a grammar check on Microsoft Word, these generators don't always work. You can use them, but you have to make sure that you double check what they've given you, any of these generators, including the one on Microsoft Word. Check them with the examples that I've provided. There's a checklist for avoiding plagiarism on page 285. Keep this checklist available. Review the plagiarism policy in the syllabus. Cite every quote, paraphrase, and summary in your paper, and make sure you actually use your own words and structure in any paraphrases. This will give checklist is a checklist you should go over to make sure you're not plagiarizing. It's on page 285 of your book. There's also a checklist for using quotes. Sometimes you should be summarizing or paraphrasing a source instead of using a quote. If the quotation given is necessary for the reader to see the exact wording, then you should use the quote. If the language is especially engaging, then you should use a quote and not a summary. And if the author is someone who's a respected authority and the passage lends weight to your argument because the author is a respected authority, then you should use a quote, not a paraphrase. Quotes must be incorporated correctly. By that I mean you should use signal phrases to incorporate quotes smoothly and to differentiate between your ideas and those of your sources. Don't just stick quotes in with no introduction and no contextualization. Use long quotes, that is block quotes, sparingly and comment on them extensively. Format quotes correctly and review how to quote on page 293 to 294. It's important that you review those pages in critical thinking, reading, and writing for quoting. You must give quotes context, lead into them and attribute them to sources, then connect them to your writing. Here's an example. Dr. Riley criticizes those who claim vending machines fund schools. She claims, "No amount of revenue for a school justifies filling children with empty calories and robbing them of nutrition." She and other experts agree that vending machines have no place on school grounds. This person has given the contextualization. She's introduced the quote, given the quote, correctly cited it, and then connected it to her own argument. The writer has introduced the quote with a signal phrase, and the quote has been connected to the writer's own argument. Besides using how to quote on page 293 to 294, I highly recommend this website from University of North Carolina that discusses using quotations. I've also linked to this on help and handouts on Blackboard. Remember for this paper that you must cite an MLA. Don't rely solely on citation generators. Check citations from generators with the sources below. And use the information on citing for in-text. Those are the parenthetical citations within your text and on works cited and MLA from these 3 different sources. If you don't have the Bedford Handbook, you can use all this information on the Bedford website by going to this link. It shows you how to do the in-text citations and the works cited. The information is also on Al Purdue, and it's contained in Chapter 7 of Critical Thinking, Reading, and Writing. There's information specifically on MLA citing. These aren't things that people have memorized. They're just things that you have to be able to know what kind of source you're using and look up how to do the in-text citation as well as the works cited entry. You all are most likely using citations from books, citations from online journals and newspapers, and then make sure if you've gotten it from a database that you're looking here in the Bedford Handbook under how to cite an online database. Numbers 37 through 40 on this link under Works Cited show how to do probably the kinds of sources you all are using for these papers. The length of the total paper is 6 to 8 pages double-spaced. Don't include a cover page. If you do include a cover page, which you should not, it wouldn't count toward the length anyway. Images, graphs, and charts will not count toward the length. Any long quotes, if you seem to be using them excessively or you don't comment on them, or they seem to be using as filler, they're not going to count toward the length. And extra spaces and spacing errors do not count toward the length either. The entire paper should be double-spaced. That includes between the heading and the title, between the title and the body, and between paragraphs. Let me know if you have any questions as you work on either the draft or the final paper. You'll be getting comments back from me on the draft, so you can use them to submit the final paper.